Hello again. I wanted to do a brief presentation to talk about what you need to do with your primary research now that you have it. There might be a point where, after you've done a lot of your, surveys and interviews and that kind of thing, you have all this data and you're like, now what do I do with it? And that's what this presentation is going to try to answer. So first of all, what you don't want to do, which is you don't want to write a bunch of information just detailing your data. I found this and this and this and this and this. That's not what you want to do with your finding section. You also don't want to use charts or graphs to take the place of your writing. They have their place, but they shouldn't do the writing for you. You also don't want to fail to draw conclusions and connections between data points. That's your job, is to figure out what all this means. So just detailing it out there and not drawing any conclusions is not what you want to do. So what do? You do want to draw conclusions with your data. You want to try to impose order on the chaos. You might have heard that phrase before. And your data in its raw form is just chaos. It doesn't mean anything in and of itself. When it begins to have meaning is when you start to draw those conclusions and figuring out, what all this says when it goes together, what all these questions point to. And what they should be pointing to is an answer to your research question. You came up with a research question 2 months ago, and you've done all this information gathering to try to answer that question. And you want to make sure that your data does answer that question. So I have some examples that I want to show you of papers from last year. And I was smart enough to remember to keep these papers. And this one is one that is a really good example of what not to do. And this is a beginning draft. This is the first draft of a paper. And this student was writing about e-readers and how they affect college students' reading of romance novels. And he did a really big survey and he got a ton of information. He was really excited about his information. But then when he sat down to start writing it, what he did was he put all these little graphs in there that just illustrated the answers to his questions. How old are you? What's your gender? Have you ever read a romantic novel? He started doing a little bit of narrating, but really he was kind of letting the picture speak for him. And if you look at this, he has a conclusion down here, but at this point he knew that he wasn't doing the right thing, because that's why he sent me the draft. He said, okay, I think something's wrong here. I don't think I'm on the right track here. What do I do? And so I told him that his graphs are really important to do the data analysis, but what he wants to do is he wants to tell what happened. He doesn't want to just look at pictures. I want him to write about what he found and how it answers his research question. So his second draft then did that. And I'll put these drafts out here for you to look at. But what he did was he started narrating it. Rather than just having a graph, he said, the very first thing he said, the overall results from this survey successfully answered the question that college students are in fact embarrassed by reading romantic novels. So rather than just sticking a picture out there of what the data was he found, he answered his research question right at the beginning. So everything from there then will support the answer to that research question. So he talks about his initial observation, how he did his research, and then he talks about, the actual data that he found, but what he does is he imposes meaning on that data by saying things like, this information depicts a very general background information on college students completing the survey. It illustrates that there's a very diverse group of college students from the ages of 18 to 22 with a healthy mix, blah, 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 blah. So what he did was, rather than just stick that data out there, he translates it. He tells us what it means. And then he talks about his next question and how it led directly towards answering his research question, and how that data supports it. So the data is not the paper in and of itself. The data supports the answer that you're looking for. Make sure that you come up with the answers to those questions and put it in there and explain how the data supports those answers. So this is a really good example of kind of drafting. And what's really interesting about this is he didn't get rid of all those graphs. He needed those graphs in order to figure out his answers. And a lot of people are like that. I'm like that. If I have a lot of information that I'm trying to parse through, I just need to sit down and start writing it. Sometimes I draw pictures, sometimes I draw graphs, but I just need to start writing it to parse through it. And that's what he did. So rather than getting rid of all of these graphs, he used one in the finding section, but then, oh, there's another one. But then he put them as appendices. So he has this appendix A. So these are all the graphs that he was using when he was trying to figure out the data, which is great because I can go back and I can look at that as support to his answer, not as the answer itself. So you don't have to have all these graphs and stuff. His data just really lent itself to the graphs. I have one other example, and this is another a little bit different. And she did sort of the same thing. She just didn't do it in picture format. Her findings section, this is her first draft, it was 2 paragraphs long. So generally, if you're going to have a finding section that you've done all of this research for, and it's only 2 paragraphs long, you probably haven't expanded it enough. So what she kind of did was a very similar thing to what the last student did, was where she just kind of gave the questions that she asked and the answers that she got. She really doesn't start to put any kind of order on the data until this last part. This, generally speaking, the findings from my primary research display how several college-age women are indeed affected by female roles in romance novels, blah, blah. So you can see my comment here. Make this another paragraph and expand the summation. It needs to be expanded. It needs to be discussed a lot more. So her final draft then was a lot longer and a lot more specific. So I'll put that example out there as well. So hopefully this kind of gives you a little bit of a direction as to where you need to go with your primary research findings. Look at the examples, look at them closely, and see how they kind of evolved. It's a really good kind of pictorial example support to what I'm talking about. So hopefully this helps. And if you have questions, please, you know where to find me. Just send me an email. Thank you.